Do they want people to feel welcome enough to ask questions and participate fully, not sit in a corner and be lectured to with a finger in the face? Like, who wants that? Nobody should want that. Although I think that's what a lot of people have been trained to think that's what it's supposed to be. It's not. It's supposed to be experiential. It's supposed to be something that, again, calls people into the conversation so that it's just the landing point, right? It's the foundation for growth. It's the foundation for healthier conversations to follow. And the good news is, we can help with that too. But you have to start somewhere. And that somewhere shouldn't be a place that leaves people wanting to go home and cry, which often will happen.
Hello and welcome to today's version of the Keynote Curators Podcast. I'm Seth Dechtman, your Keynote Curator. Our guest today is Karith Foster. Karith is a diversity engagement specialist and the CEO of Inversity Solutions. Karith is a highly sought after keynote speaker, a best-selling author, and a humorist. In our conversation, we dive deep into how to destigmatize the diversity, inclusion, and equity conversation while making it attractive, appealing, and fun so that organizations and companies are transformed around the idea of being inclusive. It's a fascinating and rich conversation. We appreciate you joining us. You'll be smarter for it. Karith, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you for having me, Seth.
It's really a joy and a pleasure to be with you once again. I know we've been together in different parts of the country during events, namely one memorable one in Atlantic City when your children were running around, and it was just so cool to see you with your family at a presentation. But here we are on our podcast. And, I like to give the opportunity to our guests to share what is important for us to know about you, because we could go on and on with accolades and your experience. I think you know this, but the majority of our audience are meeting professionals, meeting planners, conference planners, event planners, who we like to provide them with the current topics, trends, ideas, and the importance of what it is that we bring to the attendees that can make a lasting impact. Why don't you go ahead and share with us where you're at?
Absolutely. So I love what I do, first of all. I feel like I've been so blessed to be gifted with the talent of speaking, the talent of bringing humor into almost any conversation. I do have a background as a stand-up comedian for like 25 years. I started when I was 5.
Four.
Okay, 4. So much of the work that I do is about empowering people, right? Empowering people to own their greatness. And that's a conversation that I bring into the diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging realm. I call it inversity because I think it's so important that, yes, we acknowledge and honor all the things that make us different. But if we could shift the focus to what it is we have in common, being truly inclusive, but most importantly, introspective, right? Understanding your value and worth so you can see it in someone else. That's where the change happens, right? And so much of the diversity programming that's out there, while I think it's well-intentioned, I think it's become quite toxic. So I'm looking to remedy that with, again, what I call inversity and giving people their power back. I think it's very unfortunate that a lot of the focus is on how can you be offended by something? How can you be a victim of circumstance or of someone else's words or thoughts or ignorance? And I think that's the worst place we can tell people to go. So with inversity, it's, to take back your power, be proud, be strong, be resilient, and be confident, and be in a place where you don't have to be defined by anyone else. You are your own person with your own identity, and you don't have to kowtow to what maybe the outside voices are saying that are certainly robbing us of our agency and our confidence. And that has an effect, a tremendous effect on the workplace.
It sure does. I want to talk about your stand-up background, but I've been following you, and you've shared the stage with presidents. You've done work with Oprah Winfrey in your past, your stand-up comedian background. But it's like a race to be offended. It's the race to the bottom. It's the race to, it's almost like a setup, right? And what I hear is in Inversity, I want you to elaborate on a little bit more, because this is, it's a hot topic. And what happens with hot topics is they don't become hot anymore. They cool off. But I think with diversity, equity, inclusion, the hotness hasn't cooled down, or rather it's now woven in as part of the fabric. And we're still finding our way
Yeah.
on how to have it blend and bled into, for lack of a better word, all aspects of an organization. And instead of being offended, it's like stand up for what you stand for. And it's so much harder, this is a little bit of my editorial, it's so much harder to stand for something as opposed to being easier to be against something.
Right.
Could you tie that into your idea around Inversity, a little bit of the work you do?
Absolutely. So, I almost am regretful that it's under the quote unquote diversity umbrella,
Yeah.
because I think the word diversity has been hijacked, quite honestly. However, if we really want to look at the word diversity, and I love to play with words, I'm a wordsmith. The root of the word diversity is DIV, right? And think of all the words that start with that: divide, division, divorce, right? And then we're shocked that all this diversity work and efforts, it hasn't been working. So my goal is to flip the switch, as I said, and make this, instead of calling people out, right? Which, I mean, that feels good, right? If you want to be vindicated, if you want to feel righteous, and you want to, show what a good person you are.
But there's a cost to
Right?
it.
Right.
There is a cost to it.
How about call people in, right? Because
Yeah.
that's what Inversity does. How else are you going to make an impact? How else are you going to solidify an environment where people have conscious communication, where there's noble compassion, where there's empathy? And right now, what's happening in a lot of corporate environments are people are terrified to talk. They're terrified of saying the wrong thing. They're terrified of saying nothing at all and still being condemned. So it's this no-win scenario where if you don't have people communicating, then you've got a problem. And that is increasingly happening in the workforce, where production then suffers, profit then suffers. And people need to understand that, this whole idea of having diversity is not just for the quotas and the numbers and the optics, right? It's for a healthy culture. And that's what I want to bring into these environments and institutions.
Yeah, you mentioned something which, first of all, people tread lightly in this because nobody wants to offend or get offended. So there's already kind of a built-in constraint.
Yeah.
And, how do you create a context and a culture of inviting them in, if you will, having all of that destigmatized and dialed down a little bit, the heat on it? You mentioned that the word diversity has been hijacked. Diversity can mean so many different things. It's not just the color of your skin or even your religion. Are you urban? Are you rural? Are you from the ag world? Are you from Wall Street? Are you blue collar? Are you white collar? Are you a dog person? Are you a cat person? Are you in a couple that doesn't have children? Are you in a couple that have a lot of children? There are so many different ways that the world shows up in diversity. And I think that the work that's important, especially for meeting professionals, bringing in speakers to talk on this important subject, is not just to knock off a thing on a list, but to make certain that the word is as broad, open, and inclusive as possible. Because if we're only relating to it in that narrow scope, then we're limiting it from the get-go. I don't know if that spoke to you, Karith.
That resonated so deeply with me, Seth, because I think that is one of the misnomers about diversity, right? I think a lot of people think diversity is a two-way street. One of the lanes, and that is that it's solely about someone's ethnicity, their sexuality, or their gender. The other is that if diversity is done well, if it's successful, then everybody in the end sees it the exact same way and is in agreement. That is the antithesis of true diversity. And we need to broaden.
You've got my attention with that one.
We need to broaden the definition of a diversity, as you said, because it is about so much more than just our physical presentation, right? It's diversity of thought, diversity of ideas. Now there's neurodiversity that we're finally just starting to talk about. There's so many things. And what I find just terribly tragic is when people think, well, I'm not quote unquote diverse, so I don't really have a place in this conversation. And that's come from bad diversity, right? Telling people you don't have a place in this conversation, yet you're supposed to be enrolled. Okay, wait a second. It's confusing for everybody. And now people are terrified. They don't want to say the wrong thing. They are entrusting other people who may not always have an organization's best interests at heart, to come in and give these types of programming. So I think it's very important that leaders, especially who want a healthy culture, who understand that it's about creating a culture of true inclusion and belonging, they know that you have to have a broader spectrum when you're thinking about diversity. And you have to have someone who comes in that doesn't want to come back because you need it, right? Maybe
Right.
for a refresher, but not because we have to do this every year
Yeah.
because it's not working. Why
Right.
is it not working? Right? Why is it not working? I want to be the person that's like, Kira, you came in, you did this for us. Thank you. We are on a roll, right? Maybe I'll come back, every couple years, like poke my head and you guys still doing good. I want to end the division. I want to end the vitriol. And I know it's like pie in the sky dreams, right? A girl can dream. But I certainly know that the reactions that I get, the testimonials I receive, the people who experience inversity, they are so grateful. They are so relieved because you know what? I don't think anybody should leave with their head hung in shame or feeling guilty or feeling like a martyr because they got put on the spot because they're in a marginalized group. That's
Yeah.
exhausting. It's rude. It's counterproductive, all of it. So
Yeah.
it's time for a change.
And to build on some of the things that you touched on, it's like, okay, you can be righteous, but that can only take you so long. And I interjected and I said, there's a cost because, okay, you're right. But now what? How does that feel? But the state of the things are still as they are. You're right about it, but now you have less affinity, less love, less energy, less connection. So while your payoff is that you're right about it, there's a huge trade-off in the cost. I wanted to touch on something that you said as far as coming in and talking to groups, because first of all, there's not one way to bring this into the world, to bring inversity into the world, to talk about it with organizations, at conferences, at events. To me, there's infinite angles. One could argue that it's institutional. One could argue that it's cultural, and that's all right, but you have to start somewhere. There has to be the intention behind it, and leadership has to jump into that. And the way to do it, in my mind, is get the conversation started. It's a point of departure, dance with it, but you have to keep it alive, and it takes work. So,
Absolutely.
so here's my observation / question. I work with meeting planners all day, every day, conference planners, event planners, conference organizers, and we talk about what keynote speakers would make sense or is aligned with the theme or the topic or the messaging or the initiatives of your organization. And more often than not, in the last year and a half, 2 years, we've heard we need somebody to speak on diversity, inclusion, and equity, or just to be crude about it, we need a speaker who is either a person of color, a woman, or both, or from the Asian community, or the Latin community, or the LGBTQ community. And it's not enough just to have that representation. So you can put a well-known person who might be an athlete, an African-American, but they might be sharing about their experience in elite performance. And whilst it's important that they're a representative of a certain group,
Right.
is how forward is it moving the ball? On the other hand, you can bring somebody in who might be representative of that group and talking about it in an academic or more intellectual way, or for lack of a better phrase, a return on investment. Here's why it makes sense to,
Right.
be diverse or be inclusive or whatever. And how do you thread that needle? It's valid on both sides, but
Sure.
we're talking about event planners, Karith, how you address it with them to make a difference with attendees, with the leadership, that they can take something away that's going to be immediately deployable, applicable, that can make a lasting difference.
Absolutely. So my goal is to plant seeds. My motto is laugh, think, grow. Because when you get people to laugh, you get the walls to come down. You get them open to new ideas, new cultures, new experiences. And, it's one of those things that when you laugh, you actually have a physiological response, the dopamine, the serotonin. There's a reward system in that, which makes people more engaged. People remember their favorite professor. They remember their favorite. They were the person who made class exciting and fun, and you retain more. And when you laugh, that's when, again, the wheels start turning and you may start thinking a little bit differently. And the idea is that once you start thinking differently, you're broadening your horizons, that's where growth comes into play. So laugh, think, grow. So humor is definitely a significant part of how I present. And I have to credit my stand-up career because you know what? Number one rule in stand-up comedy, well, it's be funny, but it's know your audience. And I think that it is so important not to talk over people's heads, not to speak down to them, especially in a topic as sensitive and as personal as DEI, as diversity, equity, inclusion. It's certainly one that can turn an entire, I have a client, Fortune 100 company. They just brought me in after 3 years of having nobody because the last person they brought in to have a workshop with them or a keynote, whatever they said, everyone in the entire audience got up and walked out.
Hmm.
That is terrible. That's tragic. That
That's
is not
kind of the opposite of what you want to have happen.
It's the exact opposite of what you want to
Yeah.
happen. And then, of course, leadership was like, well, how do we want to do something with diversity. We really are committed to having, these conversations. We're committed to, every effort that we can to make this a copacetic environment that's inclusive, one where people feel like they belong. But they didn't know what to do because they didn't know who they could bring in that would be responsible enough and thoughtful enough to not elicit that terrible negative reaction. That's not me. I do the opposite. It is about calling people in to the conversation versus calling them out. It is about making sure that people understand we are in this together, right? Everybody, as human beings, knows what it's like to be dismissed, knows what it's like to not be included, to be stressed, to be anxiety ridden, to be put on the spot. And everyone knows what it's like to be on the receiving end of kindness, of grace. That's an old school word I'm bringing back. Having grace, right?
Yeah.
Not just with yourself, but with others. It's so, so important for both to have it with yourself and with others, because that certainly makes what can be challenging conversations go over so much easier. And the idea that, you're going to be uncomfortable sometimes it is uncomfortable. But the good news is through discomfort comes growth, comes stronger bonds in relationships. It's like that little butterfly trying to break out of that chrysalis, right? That is not comfortable. Trying to squeeze through that tiny little hole with that cute, fat little body. But here's the thing. If that butterfly didn't do that, it wouldn't have the fluid pushed into its wings so that it could soar. And that's what we're supposed to do as human beings. We are supposed to soar. We are supposed to thrive. We are not supposed to be at each other's throats looking for the next thing that upset someone or offended them so that we can call the word police on them.
That's right.
Life is short. Life is short.
Life is short. It's turned into, it's been hijacked. I just go back to the outset of our conversation here. You kind of have to unlearn what's been taught or unteach what's been learned. And that's kind of, I think, out of Yoda with Luke Skywalker, Empire Strikes Back, something like that, unlearn what you've learned type of thing. Because it's a context of walk on eggshells, don't want to offend, or people are guilted and shamed. And this is the opposite of what I'm hearing from you. You're all about, look, let's find a way to connect. There's richness. Let's plant those seeds. And what we harvest is not only this diversity, not only this broad range of ideas and perspectives, but really forwarding everybody's objectives that are all aligned, whether it's your business, your organization, your university. And that's really what's at stake, or really what the intention and the focus is. Karith, I reach out to you and I say, hey, are you available on this date for this city or this location? I have a buyer, I have a client who, you're a perfect fit for based on what they're looking for, somebody to come in and address diversity, equity, and inclusion. And tell me, are you available? And I want to share with you why I think you're a fit. You initially will have some questions for me, even before you get to talking to the client about the event, and walk us through that a little bit.
Sure. Well, one of the first questions would be, is this a proactive or reactive call for someone like me to come in? And sometimes when I say reactive, I'm referring to people who are trying to recover from toxic DEI, from a bad experience. There are so many companies and organizations that have brought in people that have disrupted what's going on and actually caused some PTSD for folks. They've been traumatized by either, having, again, been put on the spot to be the representative of a quote unquote marginalized group, or they've been called out for not being diverse enough. And, how could you possibly understand? And you should go home and self-flagellate and have guilt and shame. Is this proactive? Do they know that they want good, healthy conversations around diversity? Do they want people to feel welcome enough to ask questions and participate fully, not sit in a corner and be lectured to with a finger in the face? Like, who wants that? Nobody should want that. Although I think that's what a lot of people have been trained to think that's what it's supposed to be. It's not. It's supposed to be experiential. It's supposed to be something that, again, calls people into the conversation so that it's just the landing point, right? It's the foundation for growth. It's the foundation for healthier conversations to follow. And the good news is, we can help with that too. But you have to start somewhere. And that somewhere shouldn't be a place that leaves people wanting to go home and cry, which often
Right.
will happen.
Yeah, it's like beratement and, like you said, shame and guilted. And it's the opposite of what's trying to be accomplished. You've been all over the world bringing this message to organizations and companies. What companies or organizations, being respectful here, do you see as doing a really great job or an example to model that are doing a good job with this?
That's a great question. There are companies in all industries that are doing
Right. And
really
all sizes and all industries.
truly.
So, it's
Truly, there are. I think what's interesting is, and I'll just be very transparent. Sometimes the more cooks that an organization has in the kitchen with the DEI stuff, the harder it is to be able to
yeah,
come through and do what I do, right? Because they're a little set in their ways. And many of them are, on pins and needles because they want to do it well. They want to do it right. And they're getting different feedback from the media, from their higher ups, from, they pay attention to the person who has 2 followers on Twitter when they make a critique. Okay, you've got to calm yourself. You've got to be in a Zen place and you have to trust me because I want nothing but the best for your organization and your team members. I want nothing but the best for leadership. I want to edify
right.
you as someone who is overseeing the DEI efforts. So I'm not going to come in to disrupt things. I'm coming in to support, but I need you to trust me as well, that I will come in with the most well-intentioned, healthiest ways to start these conversations. Because more and more we are seeing, again, these organizations that are, they say it, there's an expression, go woke and go broke. And there's nothing wrong with being awakened, right? And I think there's a big distinction, right? Being aware, knowing what's going on, knowing that there are still things that exist like racism and sexism and anti-Semitism, and there are all of the phobias that are happening. I'm not out to dismiss those things. I'm out to say, okay, how do we address them, but do it in a way that brings people into the fold, into the conversation, who may not otherwise be able to relate. And that's, I think, where the disconnect happens. Because if you already feel like, I have no idea what it's like to be a transgender Asian person, you're already not even in the mindset to hear about that
Right.
experience. But if you can make it personal, that's why I say this isn't hard work, it's heart work, right? And there's so
I
much
love that.
about the heart and the brain, the heart and the brain. And people think that this is woo-woo stuff. It's actually neuroscience, right? There are studies that have the heart is more than just a muscle that pumps blood through our bodies, right? The heart has over 40,000 neuroreceptors that
Mm,
think and feel and reason and remember independently from the brain. So the idea is, how do we connect the heart and the mind? And the beautiful thing about this is what's in between our mouths, right? So figuring
yeah.
out how to speak to one another, how to engage, right, in a way that is fruitful, not toxic.
Yeah. I can't help but think, I'm sure you're aware of this gentleman. And if not, you're going to hear of him soon. There's a guy, he's been labeled or named the Clan Whisperer. He's been a guest on our
Daryl,
Daryl, right?
Daryl Davis,
And
yes, we run in very similar circles.
Yeah. And Daryl, when he was our guest on this podcast in our early days, talked about that very thing. This is my language, but I saw the metaphor, the imagery really as a bridge, and a group or individuals are on either side of the bridge. And how do you cross the bridge, whether one goes all the way to the other side, meet in the middle, or somewhere along the way? And what Daryl emphasized, and what I'm hearing from you, Karith, is that the richness is in, first of all, we have way, like overwhelmingly more in common than we have not in common. I didn't say that very elegantly, but our differences are so much smaller than what our similarities are.
Yeah.
You know, as parents, as neighbors, as kids in elementary school, on and on. And then, you know, from there, it can get a little bit more complicated and a little bit more complex. But the focus needs to be on those similarities and building from there. And it sounds a little bit, you know, possibility and what's possible, but it's the truth. And it takes work. It takes an awareness, a consciousness, and intentionality of doing the hard work and thinking and grounding in that, and then saying, okay, now these differences, we're not avoiding them, we're not ignoring them. How can we talk about them, address them, find a way to understand them? And from understanding, like you say, the heart with these neurons and the sciences behind it, that a gentleman like Daryl was the best man at a Klansman's, like a Klan leader, right? Gave his daughter away, walked the gentleman's daughter away at their wedding. I mean, you can't make it up.
Yeah.
And it's the kind of work that you do that has something like that, which you could call it a miracle, but it's what's possible. But it's hard, if you would.
Okay. So I knew I was onto something when in one session, same session, afterwards, I had a very militant Black lesbian come up to me and was like, thank you for saying what you said. Everybody needed to hear this. This was so important. And then right after her, this lily white guy from Utah came up to me and he said, that was the first time I felt included, the first time ever I felt included in a conversation about diversity.
Wow,
And
I
they were
just
in
got chills. I literally just got chills. I mean, wow. Yeah. And that's the other side of the coin that people miss because we're so focused in, you know, the other side of the coin.
being
The
right,
African
right?
American.
Being right, being, righteous, right? Virtue
Yeah.
signaling. Look at what a good person I am. I just made that person feel bad for saying the wrong pronoun. I just made that person feel bad for, being born how they were born. Like,
Right.
how absurd is this? How absurd
Yeah.
is this? And it's like the Solomon Asch experiment. You know what I'm talking about? It was just listening to Atomic Habits. James Clear was talking about it in his
Sure.
book. But I've thought of this since I learned about it. He was a professor at Stanford that did a study where everyone in the study knew that it was an experiment except for one person. So they had this group of people come in. Everyone was actors except for one person. And they showed them like a set of lines. And the lines were supposed to be, are these lines equal or not? And the first set of lines they were the same length. Everyone was in agreement. The next go round, all the lines but one were the same length. All the actors said they were the same length. So the person who was like not in on it was like, but they're not the same length. What? But everybody's saying they are. And you can kind of see them like go back in surprise, like, Scooby-Doo,
Yeah.
like, but by the end of it, they too agreed, most of them, that it was the same length, just to go along with the popular opinion.
Mm.
And that's happening right now in the
Yeah.
DE space. When something is really out there and it's like, wait, is that really helping? Is that helpful? And the voices from the extremes are so loud that people are afraid to say that it's not. So they go along with it too.
Yeah. You know, it's so poignant because, you know, in preparing for this, I read that you had been quoted, and I'm going to read it here. Sometimes you choose risk and sometimes risk is thrust upon you. What have you learned from risk, and what advice do you have for young people today?
Well, I wouldn't be where I am without risk. I wouldn't be married. I wouldn't have my beautiful family. I wouldn't have this incredible career. I wouldn't have traveled the world and met the incredible people that I have if I hadn't risked it. I mean, you think about it, we risk something every day. We get out of bed and we get in a car or we get on the subway. We eat sushi from a restaurant. Like everything is a risk. But the idea is to mitigate the risk so that you're not putting yourself in harm's way, but you're putting yourself in a space for growth. You're putting yourself in a way so that you're always becoming a better person. You're always learning something new. And if I could stress anything to younger people, it would be that, nobody has it all together, first of all. And if they say they do, they're lying. The other thing is there's no such thing as perfection, right? We're fallible human beings who make mistakes. We misspeak. We don't always do and say the right things, but that's everybody. So the idea is, Instead of beating yourself or someone else up, just go inward and
Yeah.
understand that your mere existence means you have purpose. So
Yeah.
focus on the best and the greatest things that you are and work to improve upon the things that aren't so wonderful.
Yeah. I often tell my family, not from a place of pontification, but more from experience. Perfection, I've heard, is the enemy of happiness. And my take on that is perfection is the enemy of life itself, because life itself is perfectly imperfect, and without getting too existential, it's just, what is this aspiration for like something to be absolutely perfect? It's so unappealing. What are the most viral things, not even on social media, in life in general, on a playground, in a restaurant? It's that authentic imperfection of it. It's a little off, or there's too much of this or not enough of that, or, so you're speaking right into my wheelhouse here.
Can I share? So I know you know it about this, but I wrote a book called You
Yep.
Can Be Perfect or You Can Be Happy. And it debuted on Amazon's bestseller list under personal transformation. And the wild thing is that this actually ties into the Inversity message of the introspection, understanding your value and worth so you can see it in someone else. And again, this idea that if you can be okay with the fact that you're not perfect and understand that it's not about striving for perfection, but striving for excellence, right? And that happiness is a choice. It's as individual as we are. Now, the caveat is that it's not a constant, and that's okay too, right? It's like a heartbeat. We see that heartbeat monitor, right? Up and down, highs and lows. That's life,
That's right.
right? And then you enjoy the highs when they're there. And when the lows come, you understand it's temporary. The only time we are in trouble, just like in life, just like with that heart monitor, is when we have that flat line. And I think
Mm,
that so many people fail to understand that they look for perfection in other people. And that's really part of the diversity conversation. When someone else isn't perfect, then we find fault with them. Well, guess what? You're not
that's
perfect
right.
either.
That's right. It takes one to know one.
Exactly.
We're coming to a close here, and we've left a little bit on the table, as I like to do, so that we
Juice
can
again.
revisit and come back. But, at the very outset, I had shared with you my kind of editorial on diversity and how I'm paraphrasing here, pigeonholed, or it's been hijacked as to, whether it's the color of your skin or your religion or what ethnic group you were born into, or, disabled people, the American Disabilities Act. People, that one is just like people in general. It's not, when people say diversity, equity, inclusion, I think first thing is either color of skin, maybe religion, maybe sexual orientation. And if you shared with us your thoughts on the definition of diversity, look up the word disabled.
Mm,
Lame, maimed, ineffective, if I had some type of disability and I read that, I wouldn't want to read that till I was 80, because if a 10-year-old kid read what that word meant,
right.
we'd have to unlearn, back to Yoda, we'd have to unlearn what you learned, because some of the most able people I know and inspirational are, I could go on. You've shared the stage with people who have disabilities, who have climbed Everest, whether they were born without their vision, or double knee amputees that have world records in the long jump that you and I, our long jump together couldn't match their long jump. It goes on and on. So, when I have these conversations with keynote speakers like you, who are making the impact from the stage, from the podium, and not just talking about it, and not just in a superficial way, hey, I'm a Black woman, so I'm diverse just by virtue, so this is a diversity thing, but really getting under the hood and making that difference. It's hard work. I applaud you for it. Thank you for keeping this conversation alive and expanding our understanding of it, because it's infinite and it's expanding and it's ongoing. So I just wanted to say that we're not done yet, but just thank you. It's
It's
important.
truly my pleasure. And I thank you for giving me a platform to share my passion,
Yep.
because, we have kids in this world. And the idea is I want my children growing up in a world where the first question out of people's mouths isn't what are you, but who are you? And I think
Yeah.
everybody is deserving and worthy of that.
Yeah. And the other thing is, the anecdote you shared from Utah, you never know who you're sitting next to. My children are Latin Jews in the South, but if you sat next to them on a plane, those two things, if you were coming from a normal paradigm, they wouldn't even register. They look like they could be from somewhere in Northern Europe.
Yeah.
And, it's just, you never know who you're talking to. You never know who you're sitting next to, and the opportunities and the possibilities to make an impact. Just like you said, bringing your heart, being inverse, including everybody, just that's an amazing point of departure. So I'm kind of touched and moved by your work in this very moment. Karith, I'd like to jump into our 20 questions portion. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All righty, here we go. Drum roll, please. What is something we wouldn't learn about you or wouldn't know about you from reading your resume?
That I love chihuahuas. I love chihuahuas.
Okay, you love chihuahuas. What's been your biggest challenge in life to date?
Sugar.
What are you most grateful for in life?
Oh, my family.
What's the last thing you read?
Atomic Habits.
What makes you laugh?
I find humor in almost everything. My kids make me laugh. My
True
husband.
comedian. True
Yeah,
comedian.
I always find you get what you look for, and I look to laugh a lot.
Yeah.
So I find a lot of humor in almost everything.
Who do you look up to?
I look up to both my parents.
Hmm.
They're people of service.
Where do you see yourself in 10 years?
Ooh, I'd love to see myself retired on a 50 to 100 acre farm, holding retreats when I feel like it.
Count me in. I've read the words no and impossible are not in your vocabulary. What two words are in your vocabulary that describe you best?
Creative and personable.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Keynote Curator community, Karith Foster, creative and personable. I'm sorry. It's just, I was blindsided by the second word. That was good. That was good. Well, listen, we're at the end of our time together for this version of the Keynote Curators podcast. I just thank you for your generosity of spirit, your ability to include so many topics and ideas and anecdotes in the short time that we were together, the giving of yourself, the willingness to be with us today, and the work you do for all of the events, the meeting planners, the meeting professionals, and the attendees that you impact, and that they then have that ripple effect out into their life. So thank you so much.
My absolute pleasure. My cheeks start from smiling from talking to you.
Thanks for spending time with us today. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe to our content. We'll keep bringing you the latest industry news and insights. Don't forget to follow us on social media so you never miss an update. And if you're looking for a keynote speaker for your next event, reach out to us directly or visit our website at thekeynotecurators.com.